Welcome to Twice 5 Miles Radio, fertile ground for conversations worth listening to and remembering. I'm your host, James Navé, always airing first on WPVMLP, Asheville 103.7, and streaming online, WPVMFM.org, the voice of Asheville, heard all over the world, and on other community radio stations like KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio, coming out of Taos, New Mexico. Thank you, Walter Parks, for our theme song. For more on Walter's music, walterparks.com is a good place to go. Thank you, Devine Dial, for managing WPVM-FM in Asheville, and Robin Collier for managing KCEI-FM, Cultural Energy Radio, out of Taos, New Mexico. If you'd like to reach out to me, Navé at jamesnavé.com is a good place to start. And I'd like to remind you that we're sponsored by the Imaginative Storm Writing Project. If you'd like to improve your writing chops, Imaginative Storm is a great place to go. Imaginativestorm.com is a great place to go to start that process. So today I am in St. Louis. I'm in Walter Parks' studio, and if you've been listening to this show, you're familiar with Walter's music because he provides the theme song for us. And Walt and I have known each other for many, many years, and we've worked together. We've had lots and lots of terrific, stimulating conversations about all kinds of subjects. He's a singer-songwriter. He's a storyteller. He's a man with lots of talent around the music business. And one of the things that I've invited Walt to do today, I've invited him to come on and talk about the gear. How do these tools work in the music world? It's one thing to own a guitar, it's another thing to play it, and then it's another thing to amplify it, and then how far can you go? Well, you can go forever with this. So I've invited Walt to come and just reflect on some of his experiences with the gear that he owns. And believe me, he owns a lot of it, and I'm looking at it right now because we're in his studio. Walter Parks, welcome to Twice 5 Miles Radio.
Hey, Navé, thank you for asking me to essentially share my passion. I love guitars. I love acoustic guitars and electric guitars, and they're really kind of all the same to me. And what I want to do is just explore tube amplifiers and what they can do to my sound and why I use them, and describe the different ones that I have. And I want to start out by saying I always find it very humorous when people say, "No, Walt, we just want you to play acoustically." And I'll say, "Well, how big is the room that I'm playing in?" And they'll say, "Well, we'll seat about 200 or so." And I said, "Well, if you really truly want me to play acoustically, then the first row of people are going to hear me and nobody else will. So do you have a PA system?" And they'll go, "Well, of course we do." I'll go, "Well, then we've left the completely acoustic realm and we're getting the assistance from amplifiers." It's funny how people don't even think about that. But even if I play an acoustic guitar, I always bring a tube amplifier around with me to help supplement my sound. And part of the reason I do that is because I'm trying to be loyal to the acoustic nature of that sound. And what I look for, even in an electric guitar, is its acoustic properties. And that's what I find fascinating. And even a solid body guitar, which I have right here, you can hear me knocking on it. This is a Fender Stratocaster from 1974. I have older ones. But this is just a kind of a run-of-the-mill stock Stratocaster that Curtis Mayfield might have used in the 70s. I call this a gospel instrument. It's just as gospel as a Hammond B3 organ. That's what these 70s Strats were great for. Even a guitar like this has acoustic properties. And I'll give you a little example. I'm just going to play this without putting it through an amplifier, and you can listen. I don't know if you can hear that sound kind of carry. And it has a little bit of a carry to it. And one of the things that these Stratocasters have is they have springs in the back of them. Hear that? These are springs that enable the player to move the bridge back and forth and detune it intentionally. Jimi Hendrix used to use it. Well, I don't use those springs in the way they're intended. I use them as kind of like, they help me get more of a reverb sound, and they simulate the sound as if I was playing in a cathedral or something like that, or a forest of big pine trees. like you have down in Southeast Georgia. So I use these electronic properties to be loyal to the acoustic properties.
When you talk about acoustic, we're really talking about amplification, and the acoustic guitar has a hollow body, so it serves as the amplification. And yet when you bring the tube mics on and the other material, you're doing exactly the same service to the music as the acoustic guitar does. You're just supplementing it in different ways. Is that how I understand it?
That's one way of looking at it, but I think it's interesting that when people use the word acoustic, a lot of times what they really mean is natural. Let's keep it natural, and that electric is unnatural. I philosophically and religiously oppose that thinking. I'll give you a for instance. There was a festival that I just got approved for, and they said they love my hollers. And my hollers are these sounds I make with my voice, and they carry out. I've just demonstrated a holler there. It's kind of like a yodel. If I played it that way on paper to the festival that was considering having me, they said, we don't want any supplementation of your sound. We don't want any effects. I told them, well, if you don't want effects, it's actually not going to sound natural. The way I just demonstrated to you, it's natural in this room, but it's not natural the way the old folks hollered out in the woods, because you've got these magnificent trees that echo the sound. And if I'm in a room that basically has a dead sound here in my studio in St. Louis, it doesn't sound the way it sounds out in nature. So I have to use sound effects a little bit to simulate that nature. And that's where we get into the confusing aspect of let's keep it acoustic while it might not be natural.
You mentioned tubes. Mm-hmm. A lot of people who are listening to this show will be aware of getting their information by way of streaming it. No tubes in the MacBook Air. No tubes around much anymore. People don't use tubes, and yet I do know that some musicians collect tubes and sell them and buy them, and they're rare, and they go into these old amps. So tell us a bit about why tubes have such value for you versus the other gear, the more digital gear.
Thank you. There's kind of two types of sounds that amplifiers can be based upon. There's a tube amp, and then there's a transistor amp or solid state amps. Tube amplifiers were the original way of increasing the volume of a sound source. And in terms of electric guitars, they start with a magnet. The magnet attracts the metal strings and converts that into electrical energy that is essentially amplified by a tube amp. Now, tube amps tend to be heavy. They tend to be prone more to maintenance and so on, but on the other hand, they're simple. You looked under the hood of an old car, an old V8 car, a Corvette or something, 1957. It looks really simple compared to the cars today. Cars today have computers in them, they've got regulators, they've got just a lot of wires. But you look under the hood of an old car from the 50s or 60s, and you have this momentary feeling of confidence. Geez, I could work on this. It's the same for guitars. Tube amps are relatively simple. On the other hand, they have these very heavy transformers in them, and the tubes need to be replaced and maintained from time to time. They're kind of fragile, they're made out of glass. There's a valve in there that's processing the electrons, and they're getting hot, and so anytime you're getting something hot, you're going to put a degree of fatigue on the other parts around it and so on. So you have to be careful. The wonderful thing about a tube amplifier is that it is organic. And organic, oh my gosh, that means natural. So here we have an amplifier that's working off natural properties of electrons being bounced around and heated up and so on. And is that unnatural? I don't think so. I think a magnet is natural. I think wire is natural. and I think electrons are natural. So I see all of this as just acoustic. What I try to do with electric guitars is to present them in a beautiful way. My setup and my rig is maybe a little bit different. When I'm happiest, I will have a tube amplifier and a transistor amplifier, which is what I have here. These are both American-made amplifiers. This is the smallest I have, because we're in a small room right now. This is a Burris amplifier made in Lexington, Kentucky, made by hand right here in the U.S. It's a small thing called a Royal Bluesman, and I just love this because I can play in radio stations and small studios and get a great sound. Now, just listen to the tube, just the tube amplifier. I'll play it real soft for you. What I can hear, and I don't know if maybe y'all can hear it, is this slowness. A tube amplifier will process my sound in a little bit of a lazy way. It takes its time to get it out to the audience, but we're talking milliseconds here. Now, you compare that to a transistor amp, and here's a transistor amp. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to describe what I'm hearing in this room. The transistor amplifier is clear. Now, a lot of people will say, well, just play a transistor amp. I like that one because it's nice and clear. Well, I will say, but I like tube amplifiers because they're nice and warm sounding and they're welcoming. They're just a little bit slower on their reproduction of the sound. Again, we're talking milliseconds. But if I'm playing something that's nice and slow, I don't mind a slower reproduction of it. I don't mind it being a little bit lazy. Now, if I'm playing something that's fast, like a funk song, I'm gonna just, that kind of a groove, or that's a transistor amp, and it just loyally grabs those notes and serves them back to me as quick as I play them. But the tube amplifier is a little lazier. It's a little bit more southern, and it says, I'm gonna take my time with this. So what I do is I kind of combine both, and I'll just get it from night to night, just at the right level. It's a marriage of a tube processing, which is slower and warmer, and the transistor, which is a little bit more brighter, meaning a little bit more trebly, but yet quicker. So there's this marriage of quick and slow.
And also I hear a buzz that is not there when you start to play, or it's underneath the play.
Yeah.
And you like having that buzz, and when people first hear it, they're not quite sure what's wrong. Yeah. And then when you start to play, they begin to understand that the buzz is just part of why this exists.
The buzz differs from guitar in situation to situation, but for the most part, the buzz is simply because I'm playing a guitar that has what they call single coil pickups. Each one of these pickups that pulls the energy from the metal strings is just one magnet going in one direction. So the way magnets work, there's polarity. If you had another magnet that faced the opposite direction, they would cancel each other out and there wouldn't be a buzz. And those are called hum canceling pickups. They were designed in the late 50s, and they were called humbuckers. I'm not a fan of larger humbuckers. I like guitars that have these single coils. I prefer single coil pickups or smaller humbucking pickups. I don't mind the buzz, because when I'm playing a song, it doesn't sound like that. It sounds like this. For the most part, when I'm playing a concert, the sound that I'm playing from the amplifier is louder than the buzz. So you never notice the buzz. So I can live with the buzz. I mean, if somebody doesn't like the buzz, I will say, well, just let me play and let's stop talking. And then it covers up the buzz. It's really that simple. And people misname it. Oh, if the guitar has too much feedback, can you get rid of the feedback? It's not feedback. It's just a grounding issue, and there's nothing wrong with it. All the great artists who played Fender Stratocasters like this, it didn't matter if it was Jimi Hendrix or David Gilmour and Pink Floyd or Tony Joe White, they all have that buzz underneath them. Hendrix, you could never hear it because he was playing so loud. And somebody like Curtis Mayfield, maybe you could hear the buzz, but it doesn't matter. In a certain way, it's like hearing the ambient sound of a train in the background. When you go through life, you just understand that that's just part of the wonderfulness of it, and you accept it.
You have the Fender Stratocaster on your lap.
Mm-hmm.
When you switch out the guitars, how does that change the relationship between the instrument you're playing and the tube amps? How do you adjust that? How do you accommodate for the different instruments?
Well, that's a great important point, is that every guitar needs a certain type of amplifier. I have found that my humbucking pickups, for instance, they love my Fender amplifiers. I'm going to demonstrate a humbucking pickup for you in just a second. Now here's a guitar, if I'm right about this, the humbucking pickup, and again, it's got two magnets on the inside of the pickup casing. This guitar is wide open right now. And you're hearing a little buzz, but nothing like you were hearing with the other guitar. You know? And you're not hearing that underlying buzz because this is called a humbucking pickup. And it's got two magnets facing in opposite direction that cancel each other out. But here's the thing. With a single coil pickup that doesn't have that much output to it, in other words, the magnet is kind of on the weaker side, or with a humbucking pickup that's a little bit on the weaker side, what happens? That means the amplifier gets to do more work. So when the amplifier does more work, you hear what you paid for. These things are expensive, and I want to hear the amplifier. A lot of people turn their amplifiers way down low. Tell me, I go to a show and people will see my amps and they go, well, can you just turn them down? And I said, well, A, I haven't even started playing. I guess I just look loud. And I said, I need to have what they call headroom so that I can finesse the amplifier and do things like play it very delicately. So let me just give you an example. So if I'm playing something like, and this is just the tube amplifier here. That's a kind of a banjo picking style, and I'm playing really, really softly. So I want the amplifier to be turned up a little bit so I can play gracefully with my hands and just caress the guitar. The point is, I can do that if I turn the amplifier up and change my picking attack. So it's this whole tango between my fingers, the volume on the guitar, and the volume on the amplifier. Let me say it to you like this. You want to find an amplifier that's right for your room. You don't want to bring in an amplifier that's too powerful for your room, but you don't want to bring in one that's underpowered. Would you take the space shuttle through a school zone? The space shuttle travels at what, 19,000 miles an hour or something like that? You would not take the space shuttle through a school zone. Same goes with amplifiers. There's a right amplifier for the right situation. One of the best amplifiers, in my opinion, are the very powerful ones. And they can reproduce the sound so cleanly and so warmly. And you can just caress the guitar. The amplifier reproduces the caressed guitar in a chimey, wonderful, almost organ-like way. It is a tricky balance between the right amplifier and the guitar. For instance, the Fender Stratocaster works great with Vox amplifiers and matchless amplifiers. I just love the sound of the chime of that. Vox amplifiers, the ones that I use, the AC30s, are extremely powerful. And if you hit them really hard, they will distort in this wonderful way. Y'all all like the music of Queen, We Will Rock You and so on. You know that sound, even though you might not know Vox amplifiers by name. If you play the guitar real hard and the amplifier is turned up, it distorts in what, to my opinion, is a wonderful and a beautiful way. What I'm trying to impress is that distortion can be a beautiful thing. And a lot of times people think distortion, they just think it's a negative. It's not a good sound. But if you listen to a saxophone, for instance, or if you listen to a harmonica playing, and you really think about what you're hearing a reed of a saxophone bouncing around. And when the guy just really digs into it, like Bruce Springsteen's saxophone player, Clarence Clemens, I think his name was, and he just really dug into it and kind of sawed through the mix, he's distorting that sound manually. And that's what a tube amplifier does to a guitar. And people might say, well, I just like the sound of a church organ. Well, it's distorting. You press the volume pedal on a church organ, you really pump that sound. Its sound is distorting through those pipes. You listen to a dog bark. You listen to a rooster crowing in the barn. These are all natural distortions of a sort. Apparatus in the inside of their throat that are flapping around and creating these sounds, and that's exactly what an amplifier is doing. But now people might say, it's about the volume. The volume is what makes me uncomfortable. But let me tell you, if you have a 5-watt amplifier in a small room, it's going to sound perfect. So a lot of times the sin, if you will, is more caused by the guitar player choosing the wrong amplifier for a certain situation. When we were setting up, Navé, you were saying, can you turn the amplifier down? And I said, I need to try to demonstrate the slight, beautiful breakup, the slight distortion that a tube amplifier can produce. And I said to you, I need to turn it up to demonstrate this sound. And I said, otherwise it's like us doing a workshop of French-speaking people, and then you asking me, can you just speak Chinese for this article? I can't get my point across without letting the tube amplifier do its thing. And I know you were well-meaning in that. The point is, Navé, when you turn a tube amplifier down, it doesn't sound right. It has to be turned up to a certain point to where it's doing what it does best. And just like human beings, we have to find a situation for ourselves where we're doing our best work. And that's where the trickiness comes in with the tube amplifier most of the time, because you have to choose the right power amplifier for the right situation. Again, you don't want to put the space shuttle in a school zone. There's a sweet spot for every amplifier.
So you're talking about the line of distortion, which is an interesting subject for me, because you start with the unplugged guitar and it has a certain kind of sound. You plug it into the transistor and the tube amps and it processes it, distorts it, rearranges it, changes it. Is there a difference between distortion and change? Maybe not. It's just evolving it. So it evolves it, it distorts it, it changes it. And then my concern was we now come back into a different form of mic, which is lavalier mics designed for voice. Those lavalier mics are going to, yet again, distort the music. It's going to come in here onto this system, which is a different kind of system, and it will distort it again. Finally, it lands in my ears, which distort because I may not have the same kind of hearing that you do.
You're exactly right.
So we're distorting all the way through, and so when it lands here for people to hear it, if it's really too loud, then there's a distortion that happens on this that's not happening there. So we have to love the
balance
mess.
all that.
We have to
Yeah.
balance and love the mess.
There's a lot of variables to balance, and the point that you just brought up, another way of saying that is that what's happening in your system, if we're not careful, is that we're getting digital distortion. And digital distortion is awful. You do not want to hear that, because it's what you hear when you open up your laptop computer and you turn it up all the way, and it's just this, it's what a lot of us were hearing in the beginning of the Zoom call era during the COVID, before we understood how to set our volume levels. That's an unfortunate thing, and that is a very interesting, kind of almost philosophical question, because if we're going to receive our music ultimately digitally through little earbuds that are no bigger than a quarter of an inch in diameter or whatever, then why mess with all these digital amplifiers? Why don't I just plug direct into a computer? And the answer is, it still sounds better to do it the old school way. I've listened to all these, what they call modeling amplifiers, that simulate the tube experience, and they do a poor job of it. They're not convincing to me. Now, maybe I'm just too old school, and I will use them if I have to. It's not satisfying to me. I can hear the difference.
What's interesting about the point you just made, we're talking about the guitar, the strings, the magnets, the plugs, the amplifiers, all the way through to the sound file that I'm recording right now. But you know, if you and I weren't in this room, and all of this equipment were sitting here, the guitar, everything, would there be any sound to record? I don't think so, because nobody's playing the instrument.
Right.
So the source of all of this comes from something that could not be any more natural. The human imagination, the human body. Your body and all that you know has to show up and make the music. If you plug that guitar into this system and went straight to digital, energetically speaking, you would neutralize something inside of you that's way beyond equipment. By having all of this set up the way you like it, it energizes your psychology in a way that maybe allows nuance in the song that wouldn't be there otherwise.
Navé, that is so true. And the thing that I'm so grateful of in my musical experience is that now at the age 65, I really accept the differences between the different variables that I have to contend with. I don't try to make one guitar do everything. I can. And if I was on a desert isle, I could take any of these guitars, provided there was power, and do just fine. I could play everything on one guitar. But ideally, you learn to accept the variables that you have to contend with the different types of guitars and the different amplifiers and speakers. And what I'm mystified by is that when you go into a guitar store, people just think, well, okay, here's a Fender Stratocaster on the wall. You will plug it into a Marshall amplifier. Yeah, it sounds great. Well, a lot of times I'll be standing by buying a microphone or something, and I'll hear some salesman telling a person thinking about purchasing something that it sounds great, and it sounds awful. And I'll go up to the guy and I'll say, put that guitar in this amplifier right here. And then they'll look at me like I'm a weirdo. And then when they do what I asked them to do, they realize, oh, this guy knows what he's doing. My point is, a lot of the salesmen don't even realize that this concept that the variables of the amplifiers, of the guitars, they need to be taken into consideration. And the challenge is, not many people who are working in music stores have bothered to educate themselves on this because they don't have experience with it. And I would probably make a good guitar salesman or an amplifier salesman because I understand all these properties, and I would not want to sell something to somebody that would not be a good match. Essentially, you are talking about matchmaking. If we were starting this interview all over again, I would say the business of pairing a guitar up with an amplifier is matchmaking. it's just like a dating service in a certain way. If you fall in love with one or the other, and probably you're going to fall in love with the guitar first, because you can't just hear an amplifier if you don't have anything plugged into it. You could fall in love with the looks of it, and you know that doesn't work too well in human beings either. So I don't advise falling in love with the looks of an amplifier and convincing yourself that it's going to be the right one for you. So go to the guitar rack first. Fall in love with the guitar. And what I mean by falling in love is, does that guitar play you? There's the irony of it. You want the guitar to bring out things in you that you never knew you had. You want to bring out a little song bit and you go, oh boy, that's cool. Well, that could lead me to here. And that could lead us, you know, it's like, well, I just played a Fender Telecaster. Now I picked up a Guild Starfire from 1968. And I didn't want to play this on the Fender Telecaster. And so this Guild, it pulls this banjo stuff out of me. What's going on here? And what that is, that's love. That's a guitar dancing with you and understanding the way you step and understanding your concept of rhythm. The guitar is meant for you in that sense, and you're meant for that guitar. You pay attention to that stuff. If you go into a guitar store and you have the mindset, I'm going to buy a Fender Stratocaster today, you are cheating yourself. That's just like going into a nightclub and saying, I want to fall in love with somebody from Singapore tonight. It's ridiculous. You would be ill-advised to do that. You should go in with an open heart and an open mind and let the universe, and in this case, the rack of guitars, present the right one to you. And you also have to make this agreement with yourself. You may go into that store and not be spoken to. You might not connect with anything on the guitar rack. And that's okay. That's okay. Just walk out and say, I'll get it next time. Be at peace with that. So once you do find a guitar that you like, then you search for the amplifier. And my advice to anybody who has a passion for electric guitars, the best thing to do is to just plug your guitar into as many different amplifiers as you can. And you make the decision for yourself. Your heart will make the decision. Your sensibilities will make the right decision. Then you know you've got something that's going to work for you, because let me tell you, not every amplifier works well for every guitar. Don't just buy a Marshall amplifier because it says Marshall and you saw Jimi Hendrix or Jimmy Page play it. That's a waste of time. You've got to ask yourself, what are my applications for it? I love a lot of the boutique makers of amplifiers. And I like trying to support American makers as much as possible. Like when I'm in a small situation, a radio station or a very small club, I will play this Burris amplifier, B-U-R-R-I-S-S. You can only find them used now. The gentleman stopped making them. But they were made out of Lexington, Kentucky, and made by hand. Because he was a small operation, he couldn't put out the volume that he needed to, or he didn't have the advertising money or whatever. But he was a hell of a nice guy, and he had a passion for it, and I feel for him. This transistor amp that I have is very, very unusual, because I'm using a bass amplifier that's normally used for electric and acoustic jazz players. That's my transistor amp that I pair up with a tube amplifier. I'm using what was made to be a bass amplifier by a man named Walter Woods. And these are very expensive, handmade. This was the first amplifier that could produce an extreme amount of power for a small amount of space. This guy was an engineer, I think, in the Air Force. So he was a military technician, a military engineer, but he had a love for music, and he built these amplifiers. He still builds them, but he's about out of it at this point. I like this because it has a punchy low end. The low end is quick and it's clear. But I wouldn't want to play Jimi Hendrix music through this. So let me just show you. This is just the transistor amplifier. You know, Well, I'm in a different tuning here, so it's kind of, listen to how quickly and accurately it reproduces these notes. You hear that kind of pop and snap? That's what we call transients. That means bam! It's picking it up immediately. No delay time. Nobody's just kind of sashaying. These amplifiers don't sashay to work. They hop to immediately. They stand at attention and do what you want just as quickly as you ask them to. But a tube amplifier is more chill, you know? And that's just what I love, is being able to combine that. I'm gonna dial in the tube amplifier now. So here's a little bit of the tube. Hopefully it won't be too loud. If you listen real closely, there's a little bit of distortion in that sound. You know? Just a little bit of distortion. I call it hair. Just got a little bit of hair on it. But I combine that with the sound of the transistor, and it's a wonderful mix. And it changes from song to song. I'll go over to my tube amp in the middle of the song and turn it down just a little bit because I want more of the clean transistor. It's a wonderful thing. Now this is just for a small setting. If I'm playing at a concert in a coffee house or something like that, or if I'm playing in a big theater and they have good microphones on it, I can use this small little amplifier for me. And that's great because it gives me less to carry around. The older I get, the less interested I am in having a lot of stage volume. It's not fun for me. I think the mechanisms in all over your body, they start to be less tolerant of strenuousness. I mean, that's to say the least.
Moving now away from the amplifiers and here and the speakers and all the stuff that we have here. Earlier you gave an example of the holler. Now I would like for you, as we move toward our last bit of time together, like for you to reflect on the amplification properties of the Okefenokee Swamp. I'm thinking it's an amplifier as well. It's plugged into something that has nothing to do with electricity, tubes or transistors.
Yeah.
And yet when you have been down there doing your research about these people who lived in the swamp and used their hollers to amplify their messages across to the homes they were returning to, there's an amplification process that you have to adjust to when you're down there making your hollers and recording them. Yeah. How does the swamp function as an amplifier?
Well, the swamp carries the sound. It's easy to demonstrate that because you can just put your hands in front of your mouth and then all of a sudden it sounds like you're singing into a cup. You know how we did when we were kids and we were trying to understand what Alexander Graham Bell did with the cup and the string. It sounds like that. But if you sing over a body of water that has nothing but lily pads on it, that water is going to carry in more of a natural way, possibly more like a transistor amplifier. But now you get into the forest part of it. You get into the piney woods where the vegetation on the trees is only at the top. The lion's share of the tree itself has no branches. Then those branches move in small ways and they help to carry that sound. I'm convinced that the branches actually affect the sound. When you holler, if I were to go, now when I stop like that in the piney woods, when I go, it doesn't die out like it does in this dry studio. It carries for almost 15 seconds, and that's a long time. What carries it? I'm convinced that those pine trees are vibrating in a slight way, and they're just passing that sound on. I would love to be able to scientifically validate that. The only thing that I've ever heard or felt that sounds similar to it is singing like that in a big, grand, empty room, like a ballroom or a cathedral. I did that when I last visited the Okefenokee. I sang an Italian aria out there. Si dolcemente in seno mi sta, che Io vivo contento per cruda lealtà. And a lot of times you really only hear the carrying effect until you stop. Per cruda lealtà. And then you hear the carry. Nel ciel di bellezza s'accresci fierezza et manchi pietà. And then you hear the carry. It was a wonderful little trial that I did out there in the middle of nowhere. When I first did the hollers, I thought, well, these birds and alligators are sort of ancestrally used to this sound because these homesteaders would come out there and do hollers, but they've never heard anything like an Italian aria out in the middle of the swamp. It's very interesting. One more thing that I'll say about the swamp is when I do these hollers, I find that birds gather. You know, they come in and they'll check you out. The gators don't seem to be fazed by it either. It's not. I wouldn't say that the gators come and take a seat and listen to me. They don't swim away. They just kind of seem to just hang out there, and it just seems natural to them. And there's something, again, the naturalness of the amplification. When sound carries, it almost sounds in the swamp like my voice is being amplified by those pine trees. It's being augmented. The sound, it's almost being held aloft, and it's louder than it actually is. I don't know what the technical properties of that are. That's all to say, what I try to do with amplifiers, I try to remember that they are replicators of natural phenomenon. And I try to produce beauty, and I try to bring beauty to the world, even if it's kind of a little bit edgy sounding, like with my swamp banjo kind of technique. It's still beautiful to me, and I hope y'all see it that way as well, or at least can try to see it that way.
Well, Walter Parks, we could spend 3 or 4 more hours talking about this, but we have arrived at our final bit of time, and so thank you for spending this hour talking about what I know you love, and I've learned a lot.
I love being here and talking with you. Well, I'm here in my studio, but when I say here, I'm talking about in the space that we create is just trying to figure out this world and trying to figure out life, you know.
Yeah.
So
we've been doing it a long time, and I hope we can continue on. So
come back.
I will. Thanks, Walt. And there you go, my friends. Thus concludes the first part of my conversation with Walter Parks. After Walter and I finished at his studio, we went downstairs and he gave me a tour of his amps, and then we came back upstairs and he dove more deeply into his equipment. So I'm looking forward to putting that show together and offering it to you a little later. During this time with Walter, he mentioned his hollers. So what I would like to do now is give you a sample of Walter's work from the holler point of view. This piece is fully recorded. Now that you know something about Walter's work in the studio, you'll be able to appreciate how this sounds. This is called the Coming Home Holler, Walter Parks. And that was The Coming Home Holler by Walter Parks. I'd now like to offer you something that Walter and I did collaboratively many years ago. We recorded this on 23rd Street in New York City, also recorded it in his studio in Jersey City back when we were both living and working in New York. This piece was recorded analog, on tape. There was no digital involved in it. If I had it to do over again, I'd probably take a little bit of a different approach with my spoken word part. I love what Walter did with his musical part. And this piece is called Picasso, and you'll get a sense of why it's called Picasso as you listen to it.
He wants to live. He wants to live. He wants to live like Picasso. Just a simple little thing. He wants to live. He wants to live. He wants to live like Picasso. Send it on down low. Likes to paint those ladies in a nice light.
Late January. I've walked through the Picasso Museum 3 times. I step out into early twilight on a Paris side street and stroll into raw skies, just like Picasso might have. Till I settle in a cafe to drink an expensive glass of red wine. I've always wanted to live like Picasso.
Give it to him, Lord Jesus. He wants to live. He wants to live. That's right. He wants to live like Picasso. Just like Picasso. He wants to live. He wants to live. He wants to live like Picasso.
I want to leave image upon image hanging on walls. Art students will copy my canvases in faded afternoons. I sit in this cafe, hoping to live to 93. I began sketching faces of all the women I've loved.
They'd be beautiful.
Just like Picasso.
He did it.
I want to live like Picasso.
He did it. 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 He wants to live. He wants to live. I mean, really live. He wants to live like Picasso. Not just like anybody, but just like Picasso. He wants to live. The man himself. He wants to live with that little beret. He wants to live like Picasso. Straight, sir.
I start with Terry, the piano player in my church. He was 18. I was 14.
Wow, that's not good.
Every Sunday I sat in the third pew beside the stained glass window. It was always open in the summertime.
I bet it was.
And I listened as her fingers moved from note to note. This afternoon as I sit in this cafe, I am Picasso.
I bet you are. Yeah. Lord, let him live. Come on. Lord, let him live. Just a little. Lord, let him live like Picasso. The whole big man himself. Lord, let him live. Lord, let him live. Picasso. Lord, let him live like Picasso. Sit down, Olivia.
I think of all the years I've stacked between those Sundays and her beautiful face. I draw on the white unblemished paper. Her nose is getting better.
Oh, yeah, it is.
The wine has taken a breath or two.
I sip it good.
I add shadows.
Lord, let him live. Oh, come on. Lord, let him live. Oh, give it to him. Lord, let him live like Picasso. Not just a little bit like Picasso. Lord, let him live. Oh, he wants to. Lord, let him live. Just wants to have a. Lord, let him live like Picasso. Oh, Picasso had so much fun. Lord, let him live. Pretty girl. Lord, let him live. Lord, let him live like Picasso. And he's bathing on the Mediterranean. Lord, let him live. Just don't explain. Lord, let him live. You can't explain. Lord, let him live like Picasso. pretty girls, he's gonna dance down in France. Oh, yeah, just stroke your hand and pulling his ass down. Oh, he wants to twist his booty around. He's gonna stand up straight. He's gonna be late. Oh, now. Please, Jesus, let him live.
And there you go, Picasso. Mostly Walter Parks. My vocals were a little bit understated there. Like I said, I wish that I had known more about what I was up to when Walter and I recorded that piece. It's over 20 years ago when we did that. And it was really nice to be in the studio, standing in front of the mic. I know so much more now than I did then. And Walt, well, he did a lot of heavy lifting on that piece, and we did a whole album. Walter and I have collaborated a fair amount over the years. We've been on stage together, and we've also done a little bit more recording. He recently recorded all the sound for my book, 100 Days Poems After Cancer, published by 3 Taos Press. So in closing, I will offer you one of those very short poems. The music is at the end, so notice how Walter's music fades in at the end. 21. My Father's Bees. Once in Oracle, Arizona, a beekeeper told me that during the flowering season, a forager bee works itself to death in 5 weeks. When I was young, my father kept bees. He started his beekeeping hobby when a swarm wrapped around an apple tree. He shook his new bees into a bucket, dropped them into a hive. 2 summers and 5 hives later, when I was 14, I'd often watch his bees launch from the hives out across the fields, working themselves to death, searching for the sweet nectar inside the flowers blooming on the hills. Here's your question. What have you sacrificed to get what you wanted? Was it worth it? And that was poem number 21, My Father's Bees, from my book 100 Days, Poems After Cancer. Walter's music is there on that poem and on all the others as well. So I'm thrilled that Walt and I are continuing to work together, continuing to be friends. I'm also happy to be able to put more of what he had to say about his electronic equipment together and create another show out of it. So on that note, I would like to say thank you ever so much for listening to Twice 5 Miles Radio, fertile ground for conversations worth listening to. And remembering, I'm your host, James Navé, always airing first on WPVMLP Asheville 103.7 and streaming online, WPVMFM.org, the voice of Asheville heard all over the world, and on other community radio stations like KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio out of Taos, New Mexico. Thank you, Walter Parks, for our theme song, walterparks.com for more on Walter's music. Thank you, Devine Dial, for managing WPVM-FM in Asheville, and Robin Collier for managing KCEI-FM in Taos, New Mexico. I really do appreciate it. If you would like to reach out to me, Navé at jamesnavé.com. Navé is spelled N-A-V-E. I'd like to remind you that we're sponsored by the Imaginative Storm Writing Project. If you'd like to improve your writing chops, imaginativestorm.com is a great place to look. And since Walter talked a great deal about distortion and amplifiers, I would like to close with a line of poetry that's always inspired me, written by Charles Wright, and it goes like this. All beauty begins with disappearance. The bitten edges of things, the gradual sliding away into tissue and memory, the uncertainty and dazzling impermanence of days we beg our meanings from, and their frayed loveliness. The uncertainty and dazzling impermanence of days we beg our meanings from, and their frayed loveliness. In many ways, the distortions through the amplifiers, it's a bit of frayed loveliness, and sometimes we beg our meanings from music as well. So, thank you ever so much for tuning in and listening. I really do appreciate it. And hey, I hope you come back soon. Till then, I'll catch you on that turnaround somewhere down the line.